Good morning. I'm Mindy Tate, Executive Director for Franklin Tomorrow, and welcome to this month's Frank Talks webinar. And we're taking half a second. We want to also broadcast this to our social media channels, so that takes a half a second to get that done. But we'll go ahead and start welcoming our board chair, Alina Bell. Hi, Alina.
Good morning, Mindy. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for being here on fall break. Did you have a good fall break?
I did. Took the kids to the Biltmore and just social distance as best we could. Cleaned the hotel very well. They had done a good job, though, by the way.
That's great. That's great. So you've been our board chair this past year, and time is coming together. So this is, we're now live on Facebook. So welcome to those watching us on social media. Well, I'm Mindy Tate, Franklin Tomorrow Executive Director, and this is Alina Bell, our board chair. And welcome to the October webinar, Addressing Equity in Today's World. So Alina, you've been on fall break, but you've done a great job this year in supporting us as we have gone through sort of everyone has gone through a weird year, but would you thank our sponsors for us today?
I'll be happy to. First, I'd like to say welcome to all who have taken the time to come and participate in our Frank Talks today. I'm Alina Bell, as Mindy mentioned, and this is actually my second year serving as board chair. I'd like to thank today our Williamson Medical Center sustaining sponsor, and Williamson Medical Center has just really stepped in and allowed us to be able to have these Frank Talks as a courtesy to the community. And I'd also like to thank Renaissance Bank, who is our presenting sponsor. They are actually on vacation today, but I know that for Williamson Medical Center, Abby Stoffel is on, and I'd love to speak to Abby and say hi. Abby, can you hear me?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, we're glad to have you. And again, special thanks to you all for just your kindness to the community and allowing us to host Frank Talks.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And we're just so proud to be able to help sponsor this.
Great, great.
So Abby, how are things at Williamson Medical Center? And I know you have a video to introduce, but tell us a little bit about how things are at Williamson Medical Center.
Yeah, things are going great. You know, with the fall and winter quickly approaching, we're doing what we possibly can to be prepared, as always. And so as we lead into these seasons, we are still asking our community to, you know, practice all of the things that are going to help keep them and other community members safe. So, you know, wear a mask, wash your hands. Thank you. Yes. And social distance. It's really one of the best ways you can do to help your community, help yourself, and of course also help the medical center and all of those who are working on the front lines for that cause. And today you're going to actually hear from some of our emergency room nurses who have a special message, just because I know within this time it gets a little bit crazy for people and they can feel a little bit intimidated when it comes to taking care of their health in this time. And so for us, our message is don't risk your health by trying to protect it. And you're going to hear that message from our nurses today.
Great, let's hear that video. It's a good video.
At Williamson Medical Center, we work as a family. We take care of our patients as if they are our family members.
And one of the key things that makes our team so exceptional in the emergency department, we work all as one team.
In this unprecedented time of coronavirus, our call to care has not changed. Patient safety will always be number one.
We take pride in the fact that we treat every patient as an individual. It's been a little uncertain with the pandemic that we've had to deal with. Patients have had to come in and be by themselves, which can be very scary when they're already having their worst day. And so we step in and be that family member for them to help answer the questions and ask the questions that need to be asked.
We try to integrate the caring perspective in a whole new approach by reaching out to family whenever we can, phone to phone, or even stepping out of the department into the main entry of the the ED for a face-to-face discussion and just a sense of comfort to that family member.
We're very vested in our community members and our families and in our neighbors that come to our hospital.
If anyone is delaying care to come to the ER due to the coronavirus pandemic,
Don't wait to come see us. We're here to meet your needs medically, emotionally, and spiritually, and our level of professionalism and responsibility to you remains steadfast and exactly the same.
No matter what happens, patient care will always be our #1 priority.
Wow, that's a great video, and I see some familiar faces there of people who've offered me care during difficult times, and we've been fortunate to not have to visit Williamson during this corona crisis. So thank you for that, Abby, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And then we also have a brief commercial from our friends at Renaissance Bank, who are our presenting partner for this year's Frank Talks series.
Renaissance Bank, understanding you.
Great, thank you so much. So Alina, we have some other things coming up. Franklin tomorrow, and I muted you, I think, before, so make sure you're unmuted, but we've got some other things coming up, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the calendar at the end of the program. But our deadline for nominations for the 14th annual Franklin Tomorrow Exemplary Community Volunteer Awards is this Thursday.
Yes.
And we are so thankful for USI Grange Insurance, which is our presenting partner this year, for what will be a virtual event. But we did not want to miss the opportunity this year to honor volunteers, right? I mean, that's
Right.
we just had to adapt for this
Yes.
year.
And Mindy, this is one of the opportunities that we have at Franklin Tomorrow to really have a chance to give back to our community and to showcase people who have been silent partners. They're not out for praise or recognition, but we want to recognize them because we know our community would not exist in the level of excellence without people that are serving. And so we want churches and communities and community volunteers and people from nonprofits to submit nominations of people who they feel have just gone above and beyond the call of duty and service. And so we're hopeful that people will start thinking now and start getting their letters to you so that October 15th, we can have just a lot of people that we'll be able to recognize.
And this is a great way. Our mission is to engage the community, foster collaboration, and advocate for a shared vision for the future of Franklin. And this is a way that we can collaborate with other organizations by honoring those who volunteer with them.
Yes.
But also individuals are welcome to nominate a neighbor or someone they saw do something great. We have a new award this year, the Neighbor to Neighbor Award. And it's really about somebody who did something in your neighborhood and was a gracious volunteer about it, and just giving the chance to honor them this year. And Carly has put the information in the chat for anyone who wants to download the information packet and nomination packet, or you can email Carly, C-A-R-L-Y, at franklintomorrow.org. So those are the ways to get involved with that. So thanks for that. And then I've got my mask that I'm wearing this week. Vote. And we want to remind people that the early voting period opens on October 14th. So that's Wednesday, and will continue through the 29th. Photo ID is required to vote according to the Secretary of State's office, but you can also go to williamsoncountytn.gov and look for the Election Commission information, and it will tell you where early voting is taking place. It takes place daily now through the 29th, except on Sundays, including on Saturdays. So there's really no excuse not to vote. And my encouragement is to ask people to vote. Vote for the candidate of your choice, but to please participate and vote. So there's a lot. Here's the information you can click on to find out how to, where the voting locations are. So vote now between October 14th and 29th, and then Election Day, of course, is November 3rd. So thanks so much. So we're going to dive right into our panel now. Thanks for letting us have those moments of courtesy to the organization. So we appreciate that. But we've got a great topic today, and that is addressing equity in today's world. And we have a wonderful panel of individuals representing organizations who have been around a long time, but also who are relatively new in our community to talk about this topic. And we have Inetta Gaines from the African American Heritage Society, Derek Solomon from the Hard Bargain Association, Walter Simmons from Franklin Justice and Equity Coalition, and Brad Perry from the Public Franklin. And so we're going to dive right in. We got our panel there, and we're going to start. We talked about this a little bit in our practice session. We're going to start with Inetta Gaines, not just because she's the lady on this panel, but also because her organization, the African American Heritage Society, has been around the longest. So we're going to welcome you, Inetta, and give you the chance to introduce us to the African American Heritage Society.
Thank you very much, Mindy, and thank you for inviting the African American Heritage Society to FrankTalks. The African American Heritage Society of Williamson County was founded in 1992 as a nonprofit organization by a group of citizens, both Black and white. Those founding members are Mary Mills, Louise Patton, Basilia Harris, Thelma Battle, Mary Pierce, and Rick Warwick. They knew that African Americans of Williamson County had such a rich history and that it shouldn't be lost. So our mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret artifacts pertaining to Williamson County African American history and culture, and increase the understanding and appreciation of our heritage for future generations. Our president, Alma McLemore, married into the McLemore family, and her leadership to preserve African American heritage in Williamson County has been invaluable. We are managing the McLemore House, which is the cornerstone of our organization. And let me tell you a little bit about that. After the Civil War, Harvey McLemore purchased 4 lots from his former enslaver, William McLemore, and he built one of the first homes in the Hard Bargain area as a free man. It remained in his family until 1997, when it was purchased through a joint venture between Habitat for Humanity of Williamson County and the Heritage Foundation of Franklin. And then with the assistance of the Heritage Foundation of Franklin, the African American Heritage Society was able to purchase it. So in 1999, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Now the McLemore House is currently undergoing renovations again, second big renovations, and it is closed, as well as, of course, due to COVID-19. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about how we're engaged in our community. We are a nonprofit organization. So in February of each year, we hold our annual Black Tie fundraiser, which sells out every year by October of the previous year. We have community sponsors, of which there are too numerous for me to share here, but I have to tell you, we're so appreciative to every last one of them. We honor a pioneer family from Williamson County that can trace their heritage in Williamson County back at least to 1850. This year, we honored the Bostic family, of which I'll share a neat connection to something that we're currently doing. So remember that Bostic name. Next year will be our 20th year celebration, and although it may be a hybrid of what we normally do, we're really excited about this milestone. In June, we celebrate Juneteenth, and next year it will be another very special celebration as we witness the dedication and the unveiling of a United States Colored Troop statue in downtown Franklin. Our organization, along with many others and many residents, have donated to fund this historic event. Our annual celebration of Juneteenth will also see a marker that's going to be unveiled. Talks are underway as to the exact location. I have to give thanks to Julian Bibb, a longtime supporter of our organization since its inception. And Julian suggested this marker, and he secured partial funding for it. Stacy Watson, Julian's former employer, worked with the MTSU Center for Historic Preservation and has written a grant. When we get to July, we celebrate high school graduates from Williamson County with the Thomas E. Murdock Scholarship. To fund the scholarships each year, we have a prom in which usually 3 to 4 adult couples compete for the title of Mr. and Mrs. AAHS. And whichever couple raises the most money, they are crowned king and queen for the event. The application process is currently ongoing for current seniors, and the application could be found on our website at www.mclemorehouse.com. Now, currently, we have a bank and financial institution membership drive in which we're encouraging all banks and financial institutions in Williamson County to join our organization. So you remember that Bostic family that I mentioned earlier that we celebrated? Let me tell you a really neat connection about that. Bostic family's matriarch, Claire Bostic, was born in 1790 in South Carolina, where she was enslaved, and then later she was in North Carolina, and eventually she ended up here in Williamson County. Well, one of her sons, John Bostic, married a lady by the name of Tennessee Scales around 1850. John later became a founding member of the 1 Cent Savings Bank in Nashville. That's now operating as the Citizens Savings Bank and Trust, and it is the oldest operating minority bank in the country. And as our logo says, we have a story to tell. We really do have a rich story to tell. So these connections that we have with the financial institutions in Franklin and in Williamson County as a whole go back a long way. So we're encouraging our community to join us on our mission through our annual events and our monthly events that we have, 2 of which I'll share with you quickly. We have a book club that meets monthly. Currently we aren't because of COVID-19. And we have porch talks. Although our porch talks, might be something underway in which we are possibly going to have a few more before the end of the year. It will be socially distanced outside on the porch of the McLemore House. So you stay tuned for that. Our book club, we were meeting monthly on that. We've had a lot of rich, lively discussions on books that we've read. We've read Becoming by Michelle Obama. We've read Ta-Nehisi Coates, The Water Dancer. We've read Where the Crawdad Sings and many others. And we end up rating the books. One of our favorite that got a 5-star was The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabella Wilkerson. All of our members at that book club rated that 5-star. And I'd like to share, if you can join join our organization by going again to www.mclemorehouse.com, where we have memberships that start at $5 for students. Then it goes up to $10 if you just want to be a friend, and then $35 if you'd like to be a member, a family member, or just an individual. So thank you again for having us.
Thank you so much, Annetta. And Carly's put in a link to the McLemore House where people can learn more. It really is great in the summer on Juneteenth when we can celebrate together, and it's always a great time. But I think that the African American Heritage Ball in early February, it's got to be one of the largest black tie affairs in Williamson County. And if you don't have your tickets by October, it's right, you're not going. So it's great. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. And we'll come back and have some question and answer period. So Annetta told us that her organization was founded in the early 90s. We're now going to hear from Derek Solomon, who represents the Hard Bargain Association. And it is an association, but as well as a neighborhood where the McLemore House is located. But Derek, tell us a little bit about the Hard Bargain Association and share some slides. Great.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, family and friends. Thank you, Mindy, for just allowing us to come and talk today. Thank you, Franklin Talks, as we help you all celebrate your 20-year anniversary this year, which is phenomenal. As I prepare to speak to you all today, in order to understand Hard Bargain Association, I must tell you about the history and the fabric of the organization. The very foundation of Hard Bargain Association was built upon God and the second commandment for loving our neighbors. There's 2 Square City Block locations in the heart of downtown Franklin, the historic neighborhood that joins Mount Hope Cemetery and the south, which is between the 5th and 11th Avenue North, which is bisected by Glass Street and Green Street and Johnson Alley. After emancipation, Mr. Harvey McLemore worked on the cane plantation and other farms around Franklin. Working hard to save his money in 1866, he bought 4 lots totaling 15 acres from the presiding judge, W.S. McLemore, which was his former slave owner. The home was built, which was the McLemore House that you heard from Arnetta just a moment ago. Mr. Harvey McLemore would later also help other sharecroppers and subdivide the land into plots for sale. This also gave families opportunity for home equity and generational wealth. This is why you hear the longevity of families that are still here after hundreds of years, like McLemore, Struz, Lane, Bostic, Flintlocks. These are families that are still here today. In 1966, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the most quoted man of all time. Although his speech was "I have a dream," he spent much of the time in Chicago in 1966. Moving his family to an apartment in the city's predominantly Black West Side in 1968, before he was murdered, he started a campaign called Poor People Movement, which was led by Reverend Ralph David Apperty, Sr., who was also leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and Reverend Anthony engraved his tombstone with "I tried." Historians will tell you Dr. King's Chicago's open housing movement laid the groundwork for the 1968 Fair Housing Act, which ensures that all Americans have all access to equal housing opportunities and outlaws discrimination based on individual race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disabilities, and family status. Although the Fair Housing Act has improved the living conditions of Americans, many readily point out that we still need work. Disappointingly, low home ownership rates for Blacks, rampant gentrification in communities of color, and a lack of affordable housing for low-income individuals and families. In 1997, in Franklin, Tennessee, there was a coalition of leaders that came together for a common goal to love thy neighbor as thyself. Out of this coalition was 2 of our founders, Pastor Scott Rowland and Reverend R.L. Denny Denson, who would go on later to fight for equality, equity, and racial reconciliation in Franklin, Tennessee. Pastor Scott and Linda moved into Hard Bargain neighborhood in 1997. They purchased a home across from Miss Carrie Wilson, a retired Winter County school teacher. Mrs. Carey's house was in need of major repairs. Scott shared the need with the Empty Hands Fellowship. Mrs. Carey's house was facing foreclosure, so Empty Hands Fellowship put down $20,000 to pay off a loan and spent $10,000 fixing up the house. Meanwhile, Miss Carey moved to Alabama with her niece, where she would later pass. The Empty Hands Fellowship decided to turn Miss Carey's house into a transition house for single mothers moving out of public housing. A single mother and 3 children moved in along with her mother and younger brother. The house continued to need repairs, and after a while, a decision had to be made to tear the house down. At that point of planning of a new building to help the one family grow into a vision of restoring and redeveloping the neighborhood and provide affordable housing, the seed of My Hope redevelopment was planned. So they looked in the neighborhood and noticed the same consistency around the entire neighborhood and around the entire community. Why just this one house out of 2 Square City blocks that need to declare? Why not the entire neighborhood? There will be many meetings after this. Hard Bargain Association will not be birthed until 2004. 2 years later, in 2006, we finally received our 501(c)(3) status. The organization mission was established to preserve the historic Hard Bargain neighborhood by renovating existing homes, build high quality affordable housing, and enrich the lives of our neighbors. To give you more contextual history of Hard Bargain, within the community, you have the historic Post-American Legion for Retired Veterans, the Masonic Lodge, the Toussaint Cemetery, and of course, the oldest African-American home in Tennessee state history, the McLemore's Museum. Hard Bargain was a thriving Black Wall Street at one time, almost like its own McKay's Mills, if you will. It had its own grocery store, its own churches. It had its own nightclubs, its own barbershops. During these years, there was a lot of major events that would occur to be very detrimental to the community, such as policy reform within the community rezoned from commercial to residential. The business was forced to close and cut off equitable opportunities and financial independence. Also, the neighborhood would go through several economic climate changes during the 1930s, the Great Depression, 2008 recession, and right now, 2020's COVID-19. This is the historic community of moderate income families that do not get many opportunities of financial independence. So as of right now, most of you are probably wondering why so much history. The history of which we come from is very important because from 1875 to 2020, our people have suffered and had been redlined and had to go through a lot of red tape. Our culture does not have the financial literacy that most families have in regards to living wills and trust funds. Someone like Mr. McLemore, Dr. King, Reverend Abernathy, Pastor Scott Rowland, and Denny Denson stood in the gap like God did at the cross to help us get our needs met. Truly loving their neighbor to the point that it may cost their life. To our audience members this morning, in this season of Jesus' lion, not the lamb, who have you helped? Who have you put yourself, who have you put yourself last and put someone else first? And truly love your neighbors as yourself. During this year, we had to pivot and create new initiatives to help not only the community, but our businesses too, especially during the stay-at-home executive order. For example, we had 50 family members with food insecurities. We partnered with A Marshall Hospitality Group. They gave us a round number in place, and we would find the sponsors to support the cause. The funds would go to the business that was in need, and the food would go to the families with food insecurities. Even for our yearly fundraiser, which is our largest fundraiser, the Hard Bargain Association dinner, we had to go from physical to virtual. This year has been tremendously difficult and somewhat depressing, but we have managed to overcome obstacles as our forefathers did. As I conclude, I want to thank all the women out there that I intentionally placed myself under leadership this year on the celebrating the 100-year women of women's suffrage that was created right in the greater Nashville area. Leela Denson, Marquita Solomon, Jessica Simmons, Latham Berry, Kathy Acott, Pam Lewis, Marilla Neely, Pastor Lorraine Donald, Megan Weinsinger, Dorena Williamson, Alicia Allison McGee, Blaney Blatton, Doris McMillan, Cornelia Holland, and Mindy Tate, and many, many, many more. I ask the men, if you have strong female leadership in your organization, churches, or businesses, please give your women a voice to speak. Discrimination of equality and equity comes in all forms, not only race, but gender as well. My ask for the audience this morning is to support Hard Bargain in our mission to renovate and build houses and all the new initiatives such as the food drive. You can do this by donating at www.hardbargain.org, and you can also volunteer your time and talent. And if you're on Amazon, like most of us, you can go to smile.amazon.com and actually enter our organization to support us as well. If you have any questions, please email me, derek@hardbargain.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Derek. And I know that you may have to leave us before our discussion is over with because you have another meeting, and we appreciate that. And we'll look to these other organizations that are partners and supporters if there are questions about Hard Bargain, or get those to you should you have to leave. So thanks so much this morning. So we've been also going in the order of when these organizations were founded, and Walter and Brad, we could wrestle between who goes next, but on my screen that looks like it's Walter. So Walter Simmons representing the Franklin Justice and Equity Coalition. Thanks,
morning.
Walter, for being here.
Good morning, Ms. Mindy, and I thank you to Franklin Tomorrow and those who invited me in to speak on behalf of the Franklin Justice and Equity Coalition about this great discussion on equity. Brad, I am the baby of the group, but so you can go ahead and wait for your turn next, but I'll be sending you a message while you're talking. Thank you for having us once again on this great discussion about equity in the county, the country, and the world. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about the Franklin Justice and Equity Coalition. The Franklin Justice and Equity Coalition is a group that was founded right after the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. We had a Jesus and Justice prayer vigil on share my screen real quick, on June the 2nd at First Missionary Baptist Church. Doing that, we had numerous speakers who came on and gave us great content and really inspired us. And I believe that the most important thing that was going on in our country at that time was COVID-19. After that prayer vigil, we had a meeting with our advisors. The co-founder of the Franklin Justice and Equity Coalition is Pastor Brian Herbert, and our advisors is Pastor Chris Whitney of One Gen Away, Deacon Anthony Pickett of First Missionary Baptist Church, and Dr. Chris Williamson of Strong Child Bible Church. During that moment, we wanted to create a multi-ethnic, multi-denominational, multi-gender, and multi-economic movement in Franklin that would serve to ensure justice for current and future generations in Franklin and Williamson County, as we chose 5 pillars of impact. Number 1, we chose education. Number 2, economics. Number 3, housing. Number 4, law enforcement. And number 5, mentoring. With those pillars, we decided to pick a board that we have formed as the FJC, and we picked leadership members in each one of those contents. We started off our panel discussions that we wanted to meet with one in each one, and we wanted to have discussions with our city leaders. The first city leaders that we had were both mayors Anderson and Mayor Moore, Police Chief Deb Faulkner, and the county sheriff, Dusty Rose, the American Dream. During those conversations, we decided to have another conversation, which we talked about COVID. We have met with the superintendents of the schools. We've also met with the housing partners here in Franklin, because what we wanted to do was talk about a couple of things. What does justice and equity look like? One thing that we really need to deal with is this thing what we call socialization. Socialization, in definition, is the process of internalizing norms and ideologies of society. Socialization encompasses both learning and teaching, and thus is the means by social and cultural continuity are attained. Socialization is strongly connected to developmental social psychology. Here in socialization, it means everything that you do without your life. We believe that equity struggles in a couple realms with religion, family, work, peers, school, mass, or social media. And all these things impact you in certain ways. In certain ways that it impact you is, if I was to ask most of my non-African American or people of color one question, your socialization would look this way. How often in your life have you been under the leadership of a person of color, of a person of African descent? Normally, by Barner, it would say that that would be less than 1%. But in a person of color or a person of African descent's life, we spend 99% of our life under the leadership of a person of European descent. So when decisions are made about who's going to be your pastor, who you're going to marry, who's your leader at your job, what do you watch, what do you do, and who's teaching your children, most of that comes from non-people of color, and especially people of non-African American descent. So the issue we're really dealing with is culture and social aptitude. Now, in a world with a vote coming up and other things happening, where you spend your time and your money and your talent is more important ever in this world. Even here in Franklin, when and congratulations to winning the All-American City here in America, we have some things that we have put some Band-Aids on in Franklin. We won the All-American City, and it's great that we have great things going up in our city, like the marker for the United States Colored Troop. It was great that they took down the Franklin Rebel off of Franklin High School. It's great that the seal may be changed in the Confederate. We have done cosmetic changes, but socialization demands culture changes. And culture changes, these are the things that become problematic with us because we want to keep the norm. We cannot depend to go back to normal because socialization demands that we now do a few things that make things different. Here in Franklin, although we have those great things happening, we've had some major instances here, like a student posting a negative connotation, racial epithet in an email at Brentwood High School. Not only that, we had a leader here in Franklin put up some very scandalous Facebook posts, and he was the director of schools here in Williamson County. So socialization means that when you think about yourself, you see others before you see you. In Ubuntu, which means I am because we are, we see some differences in how we live our life out here in America, and especially in our county and in our country. The FJC, we are demanded to have women leaders, and we wanted to be led by people of color. Not meaning that the voices could not be heard. It means that when you see the face, you see certain things. Number one, in social standings, you want to make sure that every voice is heard, every vision is seen, especially when it relates to socialization. So when you think about equity, equity looks like this. Justice demands that you see equality. Equity says, in this equality, I will give up some of me so everybody can be on the same level playing field. It is not that way here in Franklin. It is not that way here in our county. It is not that way in our country. Because I can say this, in the newspaper, there were 30 sheriffs hired here in 2020. None were people of color. 0. There were 30 teachers hired in FSSD. 10% were African-American and people of color. That is not equity, because when we're teaching our students and we're teaching our kids, it is only from one side of the coin. And America is bigger than just one side. There is a Native history. There is an African-American history. And those histories are never told. So when we do begin to speak about those histories, what actually happens is it becomes non-history, because the power dynamic and the more dominant culture gets to speak more than we do. So if we want to see equality and we want to have equity, we must balance the scales of justice to look like this and not like this. This is not meant to say that we want to take, this is just to say we must change. And yes, voting is the most important thing, but we still have to, African Americans still have to get voted to be able to vote every year. The Civil Rights Act and the Voters Registration Act that was passed still gets voted on every year. Every time I get to go in a restaurant, it is this way. And in closing, I am a veteran of the United States Army. I'm a proud veteran. This was my October 2nd. I've been out of the military. I went in 1994, directly out of high school. The first time I was called a racial epithet, I was in the United States Army as a platoon guide, and a person called me a racial epithet. And the same flag that you wanted Colin Kaepernick to kneel to is the same flag that someone called me out my name with. And yet we have so much disparity, and you want to end the Star Spangled Banner. There's a third line that says, no justice for a hireling or a slave. So the question would be, if we are able to get to equity, we must first deal with our racial history. And socialization will help us there. Where you spend your money, where you spend your time, and where you spend your talent. Thank you for having me once again.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you so much. And we're going to move along now to Brad Perry with the public. And Brad, we're going to try to have some time for questions, and we may go over a little bit, but please tell us a little bit about the public and how it got started and what the mission is.
Yeah, it's once again, thanks, Mindy, for having me. It's an honor to be here today and to certainly represent the public. And I think in many ways we're connected to the things that everybody's been speaking about. So in short, almost 2 years ago, in January of 2019, a group of friends of ours we're continually having discussions about race. And I mean, I've been in this community essentially my whole life, and I was part of the Empty Hands Fellowship a long time ago, and people like Denny Denson and Chris Williamson and Scott Rowley have poured into me, even as I was a young man just out of college. And so, you know, my roots are very much here along this racial equity conversation. But we were having conversations, and because of the things that were happening in our community, in our local schools, public and private, issues of race, and you know, a lot of the backlash involving some of the you know, the racial diversity training issues in schools, and also what was going on at the national level. We just really we just recognized that so many people were missing each other on this race conversation. And so we wanted to create a safe space where people could have conversations and be educated along issues of race. I think we count 17 people as the founders of the Public, 15 of whom have lived in our community for over 20 years, white and Black. And so we started meeting at Merides shortly after in February of 2019, and just had conversations. And so two things that we wanted to do at that point: we wanted to educate, and so we'd have a topic where either myself or Anthony Hendricks, who's a pastor in town, who's you know, worked at Graceworks amongst other things, the two of us would lead a discussion, and then we'd have kind of people at their tables would talk about the issue, about whatever was talked about that night. And then we always wanted to have an open mic time where we amplified African American voices, where we only let African Americans speak to the issue. Because one thing that we also realize is that so many white people in our community, they're just not in relationships with people of color. They don't understand what it's like. They haven't been in their shoes. And so it was really enlightening, I think, for a lot of people to hear the perspectives, to hear African Americans speaking about what it means to get, you know, pulled over for apparently no reason in our community, what it means to not get a job when seemingly they were as qualified or more than perhaps the white candidate. So just lots of topics like that. So, you know, once again, we wanted to create a safe space where people could have conversations. Well, with the you know, the George Floyd murder, amongst others, tragedies that happened last summer, we started meeting outdoors, also connected to COVID, and we were meeting at New Hope Academy, just outside. And for our meetings last summer, we had 500, 600, 700 people attending, and even a larger audience through Facebook Live. And so we realized that so many people were really actually hungry for this conversation, that for many, especially I'll say for white people, the scales, I would like to say, had fallen off their eyes. And so we really got more organized at that point. And essentially, you know, we're an organization that has three pillars: education, advocacy, and action. I still would say that education is really at the forefront of what we're trying to do. I've taught African American history for 17 years. Obviously, Anthony's a pastor, an incredibly gifted speaker, and we've tried to have different topics. So, for instance, in our September meeting, it was on voting, and specifically voter suppression. We had Keita Haynes come and speak, amongst others. We wanted to get the word out about voting, and so that was a real voter registration. So that was our focus for September. Our October meeting on October 20th is going to focus on race in the church. You know, I'm a person of faith, and I know many people who are connected here are as well. And so we're going to have pastors from white and Black churches come and speak and be a part of it, because, you know, as Dr. King said, I think in '67, the most segregated hour of the week is 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and that still, unfortunately, seems to be the case. So once again, you know, you know, we're also, the other thing we want to do is promote things that are already happening in the community. So whether it was the Fuller Story Initiative, we were promoting the prayer vigil that Walter talked about. I was there myself. Of course, the Macklemore House you know, a treasure in our community. I've taken my own students there. You know, Derek was at many of our meetings at the, I think maybe on his first day of work for Hard Bargain. He was at Merides, and certainly some of my closest friends live in Hard Bargain. So anyway, we're also an organization that really wants to continue to promote the racial good that's happening in our community. Because when I was a kid, Mary Mills was my principal. I was taught by people like Miss Donzale Watley and Miss Perlette Green and Miss Hickerson. Those are my teachers. And so when I hear Walter talk about the hiring, you know, Franklin is a lot less diverse place today, especially when it comes to African Americans and white, than it was even then. And so when we talk about equity, unfortunately, it seems like we're going in the wrong direction as a community. So I'm really excited about all these groups coming together to have this conversation so that we can be a more equitable and just community.
Thank you so much, Brad. And thank you to every member of our panel. We're going to ask a few questions and have a discussion, and we may run over a little bit, but we're going to try to ask a couple questions and have some frank discussion here. So Representative John Lewis is known for saying and telling people to get in good trouble. But there seem to be some barriers to that. What are the responsibilities of an individual in regard to issues of social justice? In your opinion, Inetta, Walter, feel free to weigh in on this, but what are the responsibilities of the individual in regard to issues of social justice?
Ms. Inetta, you want to go?
Sure. So as Brad said, you know, there are people of faith on here, and I am one of them. One of my favorite verses, I have it on my shirt, I wear it quite often, is Proverbs. It's in Proverbs 31. We know of that book as being the virtuous woman. But if you read verses 8 and 9, it says to speak up. It says to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, for the rights of all who need an advocate. And then verse 9 says, speak up and judge righteously, defend the cause of the poor and the needy. And I think as individuals, we can each speak up. The community can come together, but that community is only involved or organized by individuals deciding to intentionally speak up against the racial injustices and the social norms that we have, not just here in Franklin or Williamson County or Brentwood, but across our country. And that's how I believe that change is going to happen. And then one of my other favorite verses is Micah 6:8, and that says to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly. And to me, it doesn't matter what religious background you have, what your ideology is. These are just normal human characteristics that I think innately we each have. And we should be able to bring that out of each other so that we can move forward this idea of equity in our society.
I want to build on Miss Inetta. Being a graduate of American Baptist College, where Congressman John Lewis did attend college, good trouble is totally different than what everybody understands it to be. Being able to sit at his feet is a couple things. Number one, whenever Congressman Lewis did, even in Selma, when his head was hit, there was a white gentleman with him on the side. And that picture is the greatest view of good trouble. But what we have morphed into in trouble is it's a platform of popularity. And we've lost that because since Dr. Martin Luther King, Black voices have been silenced because whenever there has been some type of movement towards equity and equality, there's always been a backlash from European communities. And that has been historically the truth. Even here in Franklin, you will find out that yesterday there was on the square, vote for who you want to, rally for who you want to, but there's always violence when you talk about one party. And that violence is ingrained in it. And I love those scriptures, but one of my favorite scriptures and what I live my life in is Jesus' scripture in Luke chapter 4. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor. But America lives in a system that tells you that the Star-Spangled Banner and the American flag is Jesus. No, Jesus did not sing that, and Jesus did not carry that flag. So history in America can be detrimental to those of color when we say those things and we don't get the platforms to say it. So Congressman John Lewis not only decided, because what happens is the pulpits can be silent, but now the political platform must be spoken to. And if you watch the debate of last week with Kamala Harris and Vice President Pence, you saw two different Americas. You saw America that one person had in America, and you have to decide which America is the truth. But we cannot continue to wrap Jesus in American flag and he's singing Star Spangled Banner instead of the things that Jesus really stood for.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, one things that we're trying to do with the public, and you guys are all speaking to it, is, when we deal with this issue of race, is there's really two levels to it. There is the individual level that we all have to reckon with. And so I know for us, to get educated, to read books by Black authors, to hear, once again, African-American voices speak, to be taught by them. And I would also say at the individual level, since we're speaking about, we've mentioned people of faith. I think for a lot of people, individuals, and a lot of churches, repentance is an appropriate call to turn from the past sins of racism towards a more just and equitable future. I mean, I think that's a starting point for many, but we can't ignore systems. And I think, you're essentially saying that, Walter, that people make up systems. And, when we look at our, in terms of hiring practices for businesses, as you mentioned, with the hiring of school teachers, policing at every level. I mean, are people of color, do they feel safe and welcome in our community? Can they live in our community affordably? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but as I mentioned before, when I was a kid in the late 70s and throughout the 80s, going to public schools here, there was a much higher African-American population, and that number has dwindled. And, I think we're at about 6% now. And, that breaks my heart. 4%. Okay. So, that breaks my heart. And so, how can we address equity in all these systems to make our community a more whole and just place and welcoming place for African Americans? Because just looking at the numbers, it doesn't seem like it is that. People of color are leaving Franklin, and I'm sure there's people in our community who like that, and we have to stand up and speak. As Ms. Gaines mentioned, we have to speak and call that out. And you mentioned the political rally yesterday. A good friend of mine who's a teacher, woman of color, teaching in this community, drove by, minding her own business. She's lived in this community for over 20 years. And somebody at that called her the N-word.
Yes.
I mean, in front of other people. They weren't hiding it. And so, that's real. And I think that's something we have to acknowledge and tell the truth about. I'm a history teacher, and history is telling the truth so that we can grow from it and learn.
Let me ask you, Brad and Walter and Annetta, tomorrow night, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen will vote on requiring permits for rallies or protests. Do you feel that's a step forward, a step backwards? How do you feel about that proposed legislation, which is up for vote tomorrow night, I believe?
Ms. Annetta?
I'm going to defer to Walter.
Yeah, we're going to defer to Ms. Annetta.
Well,
ladies first.
I feel, and in this question, I'll have to speak for myself and not as a member of the African American Heritage Society, but I believe I can probably speak for all of them. We haven't discussed this particular issue yet, but personally, I feel that it's a step backwards. I was involved in a demonstration at Ravenwood High School after the Brentwood High School incident. We, Ravita Youssef and others, got that, we don't want to call it a protest, a demonstration together in 24 hours. It would have been impossible for us to obtain a permit 2 days prior. If an event or an injustice or something happens, you don't have time to be able to get that permit, but the voices need to be heard at the time to have the most impact. So I am not in agreement with that at all. I think it is a step back.
Dr. Kevin Riggs wrote a great article in the Williamson Herald that you can go back to. your First Amendment rights are being forced upon, I think in good intention, because I know a lot of the aldermen and mayor more, I think it's in good intention, but it's going to come out and come across very negatively. And I think they were trying to protect a couple of things like the last rally, and to deny the First Amendment right to protest is what America's built on. And now we are deciding to make these things to try to be protected, but it's going to come out bad. And I agree totally with Ms. Arnetta. It is like you said, once an injustice happens and you want to come together, it should be the freedom of the people. And it is the responsibility of those to protect and serve, to protect and serve.
Well said.
Brad, anything to add?
I
Sorry.
can't stand Brad Perry.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so this is a theme that we're sort of working on for Breakfast with the Mayors. It's coming up on October 27th. So I want to ask, I mean, obviously everyone has talked about this has been such a different year. The pandemic, the voice that people have been able to execute during a time when there was so much isolation. But what have you learned in 2020? It's a broad question, but I would love to know, what have you learned in 2020?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Arnetta. I'm gonna pick it back. Good one,
I
Brad.
had to give this a lot of thought, because there are a lot of things that I already knew, like systemic racism, the ability of those that are in power to stop the vote, the divisiveness, all of those things. I already knew those, so I had to really give this one a lot of thought. And what I came up with is, what I learned is that old adage that you shouldn't talk politics and religion because it'll get you in trouble.
Wow.
Or if you want to maintain friendships. What I have found in 2020 is that's just not true anymore. If we don't talk the politics and religion, as Walter mentioned earlier about the socialization, how can you deny these two very important aspects of everyone's life, even our young people? So for me, we should be able to come together and not push to our corners and say, you're right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. All of those things that cause the divisiveness that we see in our country, we have to be able to come and have thoughtful conversations, respectful conversations, and they will revolve around politics. They will revolve around religion. And so what I've learned is I'm throwing that one out the window because it just doesn't work anymore.
As a pastor, how I learned certain things that how the church fell apart during COVID. You hear a lot of churches saying that we are a church without walls, but when there were a church without walls, now they're trying to rush back to the walls. And what you found out also is how we idolized everything in our lives. Very, very, very quickly, in 2 Kings 18, Hezekiah's story is being told. And when God calls Hezekiah back to reform the church, there's an issue that God wants to deal with. Ahaz has taken everything out, and now we're worshiping idols. So then we come back, and when God tells Hezekiah to take out the idols of the other country's God, he tells him to go in and get a staff of bronze of Moses. When he goes in to get that staff out, not only does God tell Hezekiah to take the staff out, he tells Hezekiah to make sure that the Levites cut it up into pieces and destroy it. In America, what was clear to me is that America had a problem with God. And when God showed up in the temple and closed the temple, he took all of our idols. He took entertainment. He took our preachers. He took everything. And God wanted to speak to the nation. We could not handle it. And then, and like Miss Arnetta said, we knew people. Trayvon Martin had been killed. Philando Castile had been killed. Why did George Floyd send us in such a frenzy? Because our world was stopped. Normally, when some person is killed, we normally just go back to business as usual. Mm-hmm. But this time with COVID, we had to sit with it. And all we had was a TV, social media. And now we are at this point, as Brad also said, that now God wants to re-socialize us constructively. And one thing about it, I want to go back to this once again. Our European sisters and brothers must learn how to come at the feet of people of color and learn our stories too. Because if we continue just to give the story, like today, Christopher Columbus Day, he means something totally different to people of color. And if you go talk to some Native Americans, they'll tell you the same thing. But because of the power dynamic in America, it is very problematic. As Lindsey Graham just said in South Carolina, young Black people can come through North Carolina at any time. What is he talking about? And that is the problem with America.
Brad, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to piggyback a little bit, I agree with Ms. Gaines. I mean, I think that and 2020, that idea of seeing more clearly, I think it's just maybe shown us what we already know in a much clearer way. In terms of the racial divide that we have, and how unfortunately that cuts across party lines. And so, even in this election cycle, we see in many ways, the racial piece is almost a political pawn as well there. So I think for me, it's continued to teach me a lot of humility. 2020 has. I think that from a positive thing, I think I've seen people of all ages. You mentioned young people, but I've also seen, we've had people come to our meetings in their 70s who are continuing to learn and who are growing and say, I never knew that. I wasn't taught that in the past. I want to know more. So there's a real hope, at some level that people are changing and can change for the better along these issues of race. And it just continues to, and this is a little self-serving because I'm a teacher, but it continues to highlight for me the importance of education for individual people. So.
This is a discussion that we could have for hours on end, and we've gotten some requests from people watching that thought that maybe we would have more questions about equity and what it means and how to overcome bias. And I think for us today, it was important to help those attending understand who these organizations are and how they can become involved. But I would ask you, what currently in Franklin and Williamson County do you find to be the largest stumbling block to creating a more equitable community here?
Well, in this regard, I will speak as the African American Heritage Society, and Walter and Brad have stated this. History. If we cannot at least acknowledge that our country was founded on principles that denigrated and enslaved Africans, if we can't acknowledge that history, and then not only that history, because it's very painful to talk about it, but then here in Williamson County, moving forward to acknowledge the rich history that African Americans have contributed to Williamson County. Many people don't even want to hear about it. And so again, we all know that other, saying, if you don't learn from your history, you're going to be doomed to repeat it. It's true. It's true. And many people are just not willing to acknowledge the unfortunate history of slavery that we've had, and the systematic racism going through Reconstruction and Jim Crow and on and on and on, the 1960s, the riots, and even what we're seeing now. So my thing is, as a board member of the African American History Society, I think that if we can at least acknowledge the history, we'll be able to at least begin to move forward. But you have to be intentional to do that as an individual. You have to decide that you want to know about the history, the rich history of African Americans, acknowledge, and as Brad said, to repent of the things that were done. Until we can do those things, we're going to be at a stalemate.
And I would say, and I want to, that's so well said. And that's of course right in my right in my passions. But I think, if our schools want to have more racial diversity, have more people of color who are teaching and in administrative positions, then they need to hire more people who are of color
Absolutely.
and in administrative
Yes.
positions. If we want to have more Black-run businesses, then we need to be recruiting more Black-run businesses. And so, at some level, we just have to decide, is it important or is it not? And I know that there's been a lot of work done with the group. I know it was talking about with Ms. Rahman and others and Dr. Bug, who are, spending a lot of time with the Williamson County School Board. But if, these organizations, if we want to be more equitable, and then they have to be, as you said, intentional and make decisions, say, this is important. Okay, there are plenty of well-qualified people of color who can, whatever position you want to name, it does not matter. They're out there. We have to make decisions, though. If we think it's important, then we need to say, we're going to do this. It doesn't, I know people get worried about quotas and affirmative action, and that's just a bunch of people just say that to put blocks up to that happening. The people are out there. We have to be intentional in every sphere of life, every system. You want more Black police officers, you want to change the way policing's happening, then they have to make decisions to change it, and so, or to hire, whatever it might be. And so the people in power, okay, which most of whom are white in our community, have to make those decisions to change.
Wow. I'm going to say economics. They've talked about the education and the history. I'm going to say economics. Hard Bargain is being gentrified. Natchez is completely almost gentrified. You can have a low-income home and you can have $1 million home next door. That creates, and Franklin is different economically than anyone else. As Ms. Fleming just said, Claiborne Hughes has a COVID-19 breakout. The president goes in, he gets the best care possible. But how many people, how does equity look when the people with the power who can go in and check on those, has Williamson County Medical Center went in and checked on those patients and gave them the care that the president received? Equity is not going to happen, and we won't have justice until our European sisters and brothers, as I said before, leave their comfortable social standards of where they work. Because when you work in a place, this is what happened, B. So if everybody in your places, if there's a position open in your job and it's a high level position, most likely you're going to go hire someone you are comfortable with. And most likely if it's all European, then you're going to hire another European.
Yeah.
And what happens is economically, it impacts everything in the business. But now we have these issues that are just compounded here in Williamson County with gentrification, economic disparity, and now you add the coronavirus to it, and then pre-existing health conditions. So now you add all of that still relates to one word that we don't want to deal with, and it's supremacy, and it's normally supremacy or white supremacy.
That's right.
Well, I do appreciate this panel today, and I'm going to reach out to you today and set up a time for us to do this again starting off in 2021. And we'd like to make a commitment to try to have this discussion without needing to have perhaps the intro aspect that we did today, where we can have some other panelists and have that conversation in our community. But we really appreciate Miss Inetta Gaines of the African American Heritage Society, Walter Simmons with the Franklin Justice and Equity Coalition, and Brad Perry with the Public of Franklin. So thank you all so much. We're going to just wrap up a little business here, and thank you so much. And
thank you.
Our tomorrow and the 14th are Prime Days, and as Derek mentioned earlier, you can shop to benefit a nonprofit of your choice by going to smile.amazon.com. You can open that in the shopping app. You can add it, but you can benefit nonprofits. And Franklin Tomorrow is one of those. And it sounds like the Hard Bargain Association has activated this. And during this time of COVID, it really can mean a great deal to a nonprofit to have that benefit from your shopping on Amazon, your online shopping. We would love to encourage you to shop locally as well. But if you're shopping with Amazon, please consider doing it through Smile Amazon and benefiting others. So next, we mentioned briefly our October 27th Breakfast with the Mayors, and our topic will be what 2020 has taught me. And we will have Franklin Mayor Dr. Ken Moore and Williamson County Mayor Rogers Anderson for this virtual event. But we also will have headlining this event Scott Hamilton, who's a world-renowned figure skater, best-selling author, and motivational speaker. And this information will be posted on how you can register on our website today. And thank you to Pinnacle Financial Partners for being our longtime presenting partner for Breakfast with the Mayors. And then some other dates that are coming up that you may want to be aware of. October 20th is Williamson Inc.'s Update Williamson, Our Schools, Our Economy, and Our County. And November 9th is FrankTalks, City Hall on Wheels. And then, as we mentioned previously, November 17th, our volunteer awards. And please, please consider nominating a friend or volunteer in our community to be recognized during these awards program. So thank you so much for joining us this morning for Frank Talks, presented by Williamson Medical Center and Renaissance Bank in Franklin tomorrow. Thanks. Go out and make it a great day. And don't forget, early voting starts on Thursday. Get out and vote and stay safe. Have a great day.